Welcome to How to Become a Production SQL Database Administrator. My name is Raphael. In the previous two videos, we looked at the counters that are associated with the CPU and the counters associated with the memory. And lastly, I'm going to now demonstrate what are the common counters that are utilized to measure disk performance. The two primary ones that we use are average disk seconds per read, which is in seconds. So this is the time data reads data from the disk. And then you have average disk sec write, and this is the average time in seconds of writing of data to the disk. So one is reading from the disk and one is writing from the disk. And these metrics help determine how long the disk took to service an input or output request, no matter what kind of hardware you're using, whether it's physical or hardware. Now, the good thing about these two metrics is that if your environment is virtual, then these two counters will help also. And if you're in a physical environment, meaning you've got physical disks also, then these two are prominent ones. So that's a wonderful thing. And the other thing to note is that my system right now, and if I go to here, my system, obviously, since I just have a desktop here, if I only have one physical disk, but obviously on a server, you'll see multiple disks, and you'll see that in a second when we open the performance monitor, that we'll only visually see one disk and disk C. But on a server, obviously, you're going to have many disks to monitor, and it's highly recommended that you get counters against all those individuals or the totals, and I'll show you that in a second. Now, obviously, the whole idea is to determine if there's a bottleneck for your disks, and this is a couple of great ones. The average should be around 50 milliseconds and a maximum of about 30 seconds. So the ideal thing, remember, is the less time it takes to read or write data and transfer it to your system, the better the performance is. And the greater memory you have, the less disk utilization you'll use, and you'll get better performance. So let's go jump into this now, and we'll get a quick understanding. So go to your performance monitor and click it open. Let's enlarge you a little. Go to your performance monitor. Let's just kill this tool. We don't need to, or this counter. And go to your add encounters, or counters. I keep saying encounters, but counters. And then let's just look for physical disks. So physical disks. There it is. So click on physical disks. And again, you'll see the within the object, you'll notice many counters that we're going to measure. You'll notice here that I have, when I actually click on the physical disk, right here, I only have drive C here, and it's total selected by default. So if I had drive C, D, E, F, G, and so on, I can measure them individually by selecting them, or I can do total all of them. In my case, obviously, since I only have one, I'm going to do total. So the counters that we're interested in are this one counter. Remember, always do this, so it gives you an idea what the description is, so you get familiar with it, and add, and then write, and add, and go OK. Now, there are a few other counters that we're going to measure, but I'll be discussing that in a second. So now that we've got live data going here, as I click on it, and always, excuse me, click on this and click on the highlighter so you can see it visually. Now remember, no matter which one I do right now, obviously there's hardly any activity going on, reading or writing to the disks. So let's simulate some activity. Now we're doing some select statements. So it's some reading from, so you'll see a little spike, and that's fine. Now remember, the measuring metrics that we need to do or be aware of is that for basically both of them should be under 15 milliseconds and a maximum of about 30 milliseconds. So long as the disk activity is within this range, we're good, under 15 milliseconds. So we'll have to see if there's any kind of bottleneck here for us. And here's the reading, obviously, right here, the minimum. So it's less than 15, and obviously the maximum hasn't been reached, 0.30. So that's in milliseconds, 1,000th of a second. So just take a note of that. And as you can see, the activity, even though the SQL is running select statements against the tables, there's not much bottleneck if you go on the data sent to the disk to read is sufficient, and we're not having any bottleneck issues. Again, if this starts spiking or consistently or rising between the minimum and the maximum, as we know, then obviously we'd have to look at whether we have to, again, fine-tune our queries, and if we determine it's not the queries running and we've looked at our system, then obviously we'll have to have a faster physical disks. So those are your two primary options in either hardware or software approach. As I've mentioned, as I've stressed previously, that I would certainly encourage you to look at your activities, and if you determine that there's an issue, always address the software side first before you look into the hardware system. Monitor both. Then once you've absolutely determined that it is a physical resource that needs to be upgraded or substituted, then by all means do that. But certainly eliminate software issues. And software issues are basically applications and queries and indexing and everything we've talked about. So this is an easy one, a short one that I'm going to be keeping. The next video that I'm going to actually do is I'm going to show you, I'm going to actually add a few more counters, and in these particular, just for demonstration purposes, as I've mentioned, I've done the CPU individually, the memory individually, and the disk individually. In the next video, what I'm going to do is collectively put them all together in one physical monitoring system file. And I'm going to add a few more counters that we need to do. And then what I'll show you is that every time you need to monitor those counters, you don't necessarily have to repeat the process of adding counters over and over again. We're going to save it as a file for all the counters that we need. Then all we do is open the file, and that will allow us to view all the counters that we selected. This way we can monitor it better. And then I'll show you also in coming videos how to schedule this. So we can schedule on a weekly basis or a monthly basis or whatever you wish, and take it from there. And then lastly, after that, I'm going to show you a combination of how you can use these performance monitor with the SQL profiler. One of the great things is that you can combine these resources. And for example, if you saw spikes in a hardware, for example, a CPU or memory spikes or plateaus, and you want to find out what specific query is causing those, then you can associate both these tools, and obviously it's a great tool because you can associate these tools, and it'll show you when the physical spike occurred on the CPU and what query was associated with that caused that. So that's a great tool, and I'll show you that and demonstrate that to you later. So I think I'm going to leave it here. This is going to be a brief thing, as I mentioned. So everything is humming fine. And obviously, remember, this is strictly a desktop condition. Don't expect these kind of conditions on a server environment. The whole idea is for demonstration purposes. On a server, I certainly see a lot of activity in all these things, but I've maintained it, and I'm proactive in determining and collecting data. So that's the key thing you need to be doing as a good DBA, and that is be proactively monitoring this so you're aware of what's going on, and you can act before it happens. So I'm going to leave it there and call it quits, and I'll see you in the next video. So my name is Raphael, and this is how to become a production SQL data administrator.